Hello, everyone, and welcome to our training, Taming Complexity with AI. My name is Emily Jarvis, and I'm the Senior Manager for Events here at GovLoop. And today I have the added pleasure of also being your moderator. So thanks so much for joining me. And a special thank you to our partners at ServiceNow for helping us put on this session because taming complexity with AI. Well, that is an enormous topic. So I want you to picture a scenario with me. You're a customer service representative at the DMV and you're working with a customer who's trying to update their license, but they don't have the right paperwork. This happened to me. There's alternative documents that they could use, but they're buried deep in a 450-page manual. What if instead of leafing through that massive document to find the needle in the haystack, you instead consulted a conversational AI tool that could quickly and efficiently pinpoint the information in the manual? That is the power of AI and where it can come into play. It can take some really time-consuming and manual processes and make them easier. So today our experts will share their examples of how AI can transform the way we work. But before we get to that awesome content, well, I've got a few housekeeping items to go over with you all. So first things first. If you are looking for resources, you can find those in the resources section, which you can find along the bottom panel of today's session. That's also, of course, where you can find the show captions feature if you need that accessibility. You've also got your Q&A tab down there where you can ask questions, and your chat tab in case you want to ask our speakers any questions, or if you have any questions for our community as well. Finally, we are sharing all of this information with you again via email tomorrow, so make sure you are checking your inboxes for that. All right, the reason we're all here today is our wonderful speakers, so let me introduce you to them. Joining us, we have Dr. Matthew McCarville, who is the State Chief Information Officer and the Chair for Nebraska Information Technology Commission, also the agency director for the Nebraska Office of the Chief Information Officer. Matthew, how many jobs do you have? I'm exhausted by you.
This is quite a mouthful.
We also have Craig Arajian, who is the Executive Director and State Chief Information Officer for the Mississippi Department of Information Technology Services. Craig, you wanted to have a title as long as Matthew's here, but not quite.
Right.
And last but certainly not least, we've got Chris Dilley, who's our Chief Technology Officer for State and Local Government at ServiceNow. Thank you three so much for being with us today.
The pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. All right. So this is an enormous topic when we're talking about taming complexity and figuring out all of these different pieces. So, Craig, I'm going to start with you here. I want you to lay the groundwork for me a little bit. Can you share an example or a use case of how you all in Mississippi are thinking about AI as a tool for efficiency?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to get started, Emily. So, the approach was our governor signed an executive order, kind of directing the technology department to kind of dig into this. We're kind of seeing these use cases in three big buckets, I think. One bucket is sort of a citizen services bucket. So kind of Emily, building off of, the DMV example, chatbots, virtual assistants, any way that you can improve the citizen experience. I think our second is a document data processing kind of bucket is what we would call it. So we are seeing lots of potential use cases in and across government where there's any sort of very heavy lift in this regard. So even here with procurement, legal reviews. And our third bucket, which has been sort of interesting, has been fraud detection and compliance, right? So we're kind of seeing these three big buckets. So just to sort of set the stage, that is where that is where these conversations with our partner agencies in the governor's cabinet, that's where these conversations are landing for us.
That makes a whole lot of sense. Matthew, are you seeing the same three buckets that Craig really highlighted here, or are you all exploring different use cases?
Uh, we have similar buckets. Our approach is different. So,
Okay.
being chief data officer of Florida before during COVID, being a professor at University of Florida and several universities, teaching data science and AI, and having my doctorate in it, it's nice that I have been able to see this it grow from infancy to now. And what we have learned is the use case driven approach to AI, right? So, 94% of public sector AI use cases don't ever make it to implementation. So, we're trying hard to not go down that road. And we're 100% rate recovery in Nebraska for OCIO. So, I don't have cash to just spend on AI. So, what we're doing is moving forward with use case vetting. So, all the agencies, cabinet and non-cabinet, and boards, commissions, they're all submitting use cases for possible AI. Then my office is going through, do they have the data? Is the data cleansed? Is it accurate? Is it accessible? Because we are still primarily in mainframe. So we have to get it into the cloud for it to be cost efficient for AI. Are we able to implement the use case? Is there something that can be done and operationalized? Is there a cost savings? Is there an efficiency? And if those things all pass, then we move it forward into a pilot. We prove that the pilot works, and then we talk about what does real implementation cost look like? And is this a weekly, monthly, annually update to this living, breathing algorithm that would be always be running and updated, and iterations of its accuracy being implemented. So we're kind of going through the stages as we go through that, and we've had a lot of great use cases submitted by all sorts of different departments, and so we're moving forward with a lot of different AI cases right now.
That's wonderful. Chris, obviously you're coming at this from a different perspective, but you're partnering with a lot of government agencies at the federal, state, and local level. What are some of the trends that you're seeing as agencies explore, get a little bit more familiar with generative AI?
Yeah, as we think about being a technology service provider to support, the state and local government across the U.S., we're really helping them understand where can they make an impact using our technology in at the citizen level, at the front office, the middle office, or the back office, and then making sure that all those points that Dr. McCarville just hit on, as we look at the governance, as we look at the efficiency, as we look at what is needed to successfully execute on these areas, that we have the framework from a technology perspective to support those. And the points that Craig hit on, absolutely. So from a chat bot, a case summarization perspective, that's one of the big ones we see a lot right now, where we're thinking about, there's no such thing, at least I haven't seen any state, to prove a true 360-degree view of a citizen. But having the ability to look at all your data sources and summarize what services are we providing them from the different data sources, that's one that we're able to help facilitate and drive, but making sure that the data, the governance, and all the policies and procedures that need to be managed are. So we're seeing a lot of that. And then underline and emphasize fraud, waste, and abuse. There's great opportunities here for fraud detection, and really understand where there's bad actors out there, and how can we use AI to accelerate and cut those things off before they really make an impact and damage our businesses.
It makes a whole lot of sense. I always smile when we talk about the 360-degree view, because it's so critically important. But I sometimes think of myself and I'm like, I don't know who I am in a whole circle. So how can I expect an agency to get that right? But I think having that perspective is so critically important. So I really, really appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit. And I just want to remind our attendees, you are more than welcome to be adding your questions both to the chat and to the Q&A portal. And we will address those throughout. So don't wait until the very bitter end to put your questions in, put them in early and often. But Craig, the theme of today is taming complexity with AI. And there are a lot of complex systems and policies and procedures. And Matthew mentioned even mainframes are things that we're dealing with here. Where do you see AI playing a role in making some of these complex problems maybe easier, or perhaps just easier to navigate?
Sure, I'll jump in, and I think I'll focus, Emily, on the start of really sort of highlighting what what I think the challenges are, by way of entry point into how to tame those. Matthew hit on this, I think, very elegantly, and as did Chris. I really think uh, data silos and legacy systems. So sort of pivoting off, I think Matthew said that. My friend in Nebraska, we have two mainframes as well, so I feel that. Um, I am personally amazed by what this technology can do. There's no question. But I do think conversations around data, the curation of the data, how it's architected is really vital, right? For any of these um, models to be trained on anything that becomes valuable. So I think data silos and legacy from a challenge perspective, you've got to really grapple with that. Um, I'll touch on workforce, which I know what we've talked about, but there's a lot of undercurrents here about the potential changes from a workforce perspective. So I think enabling your team or really paying attention to what that would mean. Um, a third one to me is any sort of regulatory or ethical concerns I think is critical, and closely aligned with that is any sort of trust and risk with the validity of using solutions like this, right? Are they, is there a human in the loop? And so I think those to me are the categories where I spend a lot of time. And we, are wrapping up our legislative session in the next week or two, and there is actually a data exchange bill that our legislature is talking about, and it can be a very challenging conversation to sit down and talk about, the value of data, which we all recognize, but the fact that we really need to pay attention to it for any of these more advanced solutions to work. So that's kind of where my head is, Emily.
Yeah. Data as that foundational piece, I think, is so critically important. And then you get into the data integrity, its categorization. Is it siloed in different places? Are you editing it here and it's not moving here? There's a lot of pieces of the puzzle, to your point, Craig, that have to be solved for AI to function properly. And I think sometimes we think we're just going to sprinkle some AI on top and it's just going to fix things. And it's not quite that simple. Matthew, how do you see some of these challenges or maybe opportunities arising here as you navigate this complexity challenge?
So we never, being mostly mainframe,
Mhm.
we are working on getting out of that in the next couple of years and navigating to a multi-cloud diverse ecosystem. But we're seeing this as an opportunity because we have a lot of modernization to do. Now, it is complex, don't get me wrong, but we've never had a chief data officer. We've never done central data. We've never even had a dashboard in central IT. We have been a keep the lights on, keep the mainframe running, don't ask questions, don't get our name in the paper kind of IT shop. We're getting way out of that. We are getting into cybersecurity, which before I was here was never really existed in the state. We're getting into a JSOC, a JNOC with the universities, the counties. We are now doing a center of excellence for data analytics and AI, where we can converge together with all public entities and nonprofits to be able to provide a central source of fractional, expensive resources and platforms that all of us, because not all of us need an AI engineer for 40 hours a week, year round. You might need it every once in a while. It's kind of like cybersecurity. When you need it, you really need it, but then they sit there doing nothing for 6 weeks. So we're trying to maximize the utilization of the resources, maximize the cost efficiencies, and share resources and platforms. So we're opening up a second office in Omaha, in downtown Omaha, which is prime real estate in Nebraska. 1 million people in Omaha, and downtown area is huge. We're going to be recruiting interns from graduate programs pretty heavily. I mean, we usually have a handful, but now we're talking 30, 40, 50 interns that we're going to be hiring, in a lot of them in data analytics, in data science, dashboarding, reporting, and AI. So as we look at this, getting off the mainframe, we've got people with 40, 50, 60 years of career service that have been working on our mainframe. and they're retiring in droves. We've got over 30% of our 800 people can retire, not last week, not last year, 10 years ago, they could have retired. So at any moment, they can just walk out the door. And we're seeing it every week, more retirements hitting as they know we're modernizing. So we're trying to replace them with new talent. And this is a great opportunity for us to modernize, recruit, and change the way we've thought about technology in the state.
Well, Matthew, if you want to add one more title to your list of titles here, you could add tourism board, because that was a pretty good marketing campaign there to move and explore in Nebraska. So I appreciate that. As Chris, you're hearing the challenges and maybe some of the opportunities that exist for states like Nebraska and Mississippi. What are some of the similar challenges that you're seeing from your government partners and your kind of experience?
Yeah, and Craig and Dr. McCarville hit on a lot of them. And the word data, I think we're probably going to say that as much as we're going to say AI today. But as we think about the underlying data and the sources of truth, both Dr. McCarville and Craig touched on it. So many mainframes have been the source of truth, for a citizen, for different processes.
Mhm.
So how do we understand where those sources of truth are? Or there's multiple.
Mhm.
My record may exist across multiple places. So how do we begin to reduce, whether we ever get to one, that's a little bit of Xanadu, but how do we understand what those sources of truth are? And then how do we begin to build that architecture, that model? I'm a recovering enterprise architect, so I always try to limit and reduce the amount of places that my data is and maximize the applications that are utilizing these things. So as we think about data integration and management, they're going to be absolutely key to successful AI deployment and rollouts. And as we think about where are those decision-making systems, as we think about these industry LLMs as these focused LLMs to run and support the business of government, we have to understand what those decision-making processes and systems are, and as well as what are our policies. That's one of the other things that I'm real excited about from an AI perspective is how do we run policy simulation and impact analysis? How do we look at what policy are we looking at? Most states are in session right now. How do we truly look at what this legislation initiative is going to do, and how does it impact a agency or all the agencies that are going to have to execute and support these things? But again, it all starts with the data. It all starts with really knowing your business, and it all starts with how you structure those processes.
All right. Okay, gentlemen, we have a bunch of questions and they're coming in fast and furious, which we love to see. So, Craig, we got one directed towards you. So this one is coming.
Okay.
It says, can you please tell us more about the document data processing bucket of AI applications you mentioned? Can you give a little more backstory on that one?
Sure. So the initial use cases, I'll start with one that's out of central IT. The initial use cases are really in the procurement realm. So really using these tools to really vet very complicated either procurement instruments or very complicated responses. We're a little bit unique and we sort of own the entire procurement process inside of central IT. Sometimes it's at a finance department and the state CO is a partner. But in addition to that, we also do contracting. So in the role that I have, the way Mississippi is structured is I serve as the contracting agent for every IT contract in the state of Mississippi. So the legal work there is steep. So those are sort of two examples, sort of where document management comes to that we see these use cases being valuable.
Yeah. Matthew, anything you want to add to that kind of data processing piece of the puzzle, things that you all are working on or processes, policies you're putting in place to make sure that that document processing, the data processing is working as effectively as possible?
Yeah, we're actually building AI governance and data analytics governance while we're building the Center of Excellence. Because without the governance and the policies, you can't move forward without a lot of risk introduced into your environment. Identity and access management with our role and attribute-based access controls, since we've never had that either. That needs to be part of our ecosystem now. And then as we look moving forward, very similar to what Craig was talking about, we're sitting on a 28-year-old system that has a ton of PDFs, agreements, all of our, we do the same thing. We are the contracting body for all IT. We have 400 rough contractors in the state. We spend 60 million a year on contractors in the state, and they all go through our office. All of their contracts are actually with us. So as we look at it, what we're trying to figure out is, how do we take all these contracts, turn it into usable, leverageable data that we can analyze? Because right now we're sitting on mountains in 28 years of picture PDFs. They're not even scraped, right? Maybe they'll have a title in it, maybe a date if we're lucky, but a whole bunch of them are the same title. So how do we scrape the metadata off of all those images, put it into a database, make that something that's searchable, that we can archive those images that haven't been opened in 20 years and turn that into a database of information that appends to all of our different silos and mainframe databases that we have right now that we're modernizing and merging together, like what Chris was talking about. Because yeah, people in the state of Nebraska have 100 different ID numbers and passwords to log into all of our systems.
Yeah.
So how do we get closer to constituent single sign-on, where they have one global unique ID, one email, use something like login.gov to create, so that nobody's using Gmail and Hotmail to log into government systems. But do that login.gov kind of front end, then do ID verification. We're building a custom motor vehicle registration DMV driver's license system, fuzzy logic query kind of ID verification system for our citizens. And that'll provide us the capabilities to take all these disparate systems with different ID numbers and logins, like Chris was talking about, because he's right. Every person in Nebraska has got 100 different ID numbers, especially if you went through unemployment and you went through SNAP and TANF and food stamps, and none of those things talk to each other. So how do we make it one portal, one login? That's going to be a very difficult task for us moving forward, but it's all having to do with the data, the analytics, the identity and access management, and then applying AI on that. So it all kind of comes together in a big modern approach.
Gotcha. You're getting a lot of head nods from your fellow panelists here, so I'm gonna say we're in agreement with you. Chris, building on what Matthew just said, there was a follow-up question to this documents and data policy one that says, adds a little bit more color. It says, I serve as a backup key holder for personnel data. How do you protect that sensitive information sourced from metadata? Who monitors those permissions? So I think this is getting into, data security, data sharing, having the proper protections in place here. What are you seeing as some of the best practices for ensuring that my data, if I'm coming to the DMV, isn't ending up in the wrong data set somehow?
You don't want your data being part of a chat GPT
No, I don't.
Or deep fake.
No, I don't.
No, this is that, and it goes back to a lot of the points we've hit around data governance and really understanding, what the sources are. And we're going to probably get to this question a little deeper here in a little bit. But as we think about taking on AI initiatives, we need to think about a very finite targeted use case to make sure that it's executing and being delivered the way the organization that's implementing this wants it to, and to make sure that those data boundaries are defined and the data sets of how that's being used. It's better to start out finite and slowly expand than think you can start out with huge and think you're gonna pull it back. And so as organizations, I'm working all the time, where do we start with this? And again, I go back to where's the source of truth? Where's the data that you want to utilize for these things? How are we gonna fence this data in and protect it and make sure that it's being utilized for the intent it's intended to be utilized, and how it's going to drive business processes forward? And so looking at all those things, when we think about data, we often think bits and bytes data, but back to the document analysis and those documents, the petabytes probably of PDFs that Dr. McCarville talked about. But how do you look at some of those data sources as well? And how do you use, natural language processing, document analysis, and again, to paint the whole picture as you're looking at data, little d, capital D, or all caps D data.
for sure.
Oh man, now you're adding lots of capitals and lower cases, which brings me to the next question in the Q&A portal. And Craig, this one, I'll start with you, but if anyone else wants to jump in, by all means, feel free. The question says, are you running into any issues with accuracy and data summaries created by AI? How are you QCing data products created by AI? And I think this is a great question, and I know it'll go back to obviously some policies, but I'm also curious about your perspective on the workforce piece of it, kind of that human in the loop part.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think that's a fabulous question. I think we're on the front fringe of really grappling with that.
Okay.
No particular issues so far. We actually are piloting, Matthew was talking about pilots in use case. We're piloting a bill summary AI bot with the legislature this session. So we've rolled that out for them, and I think so far so good. The to your point, Emily, too, the human in the loop is really an interesting conversation from an accountability. What does that accountability framework look like? I also think, I've paid a lot of attention to the bias component potentially.
Mhm.
There are, Matthew and I, from a higher ed perspective, I think Matthew would appreciate this, but there's a couple of really fabulous books out there, whether it's Weapons of Math Destruction or
Good.
The Ethical Algorithm, where again, and Emily, you touched on this, right? This technology is amazing, but and we talked about this as well. It sits on top of great data,
Mhm.
but you have to really be thoughtful about outcomes and really negating the potential for bias, which is there, especially given as these tools are intersect with more sensitive kinds of decisions that government makes, right? So, what you're seeing in some of these use cases are they're productivity driven, they're efficiency driven. Eventually, though, we're going to start seeing use cases where people's lives or benefits get talked about. There could be some other things. So I think I always really find looping back to the data question is really important. And then the ethical and the bias related kind of questions. I think you've got to keep that top of mind as these tools are just amazingly powerful.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. And there there is a lot of power. We're not really 100% sure yet how it'll all be realized. So keeping that all in perspective is really useful. Matthew, a question came in here is how do you measure the long-term success of these projects? Is there a measure besides, let's say, efficiency gains, or what does success here look like?
Yeah, I mean, Craig kind of talked about it too. It's right now they are efficiency or dollar sign driven, right? We're looking at, our governor's kind of separated them into hard costs and soft cost, right? And a lot of them we're finding out are theoretical. You think, oh, we're going to save 500 man hours because we spend that much manual hours reviewing all these things right now.
Yeah.
And then 6 months later, you're going, well, we're still spending that many hours doing it. It's just we're doing more with the AI than we did before. We're churning through it faster, but we didn't actually save the money. We still have that resource spending all that time doing that. We're just doing more. So sometimes we're finding out the hard and the soft cost end up changing in the end. And
Yeah.
we're trying to keep an eye on that because if it's driven by hard or soft costs as a use case, and then you don't realize those, do you kill the project? Do you measure it differently? What does success look like? And AI is one of those things that's very hard to measure the definition of success because it can morph. Or you think it's one thing in the beginning, and then you find out after you've implemented it that it's actually 4 different things that you didn't even expect. And then you got the whole effect of retirements, modernizing. We've got all these people that if they're not retiring, I have to reskill them. I don't need an army of COBOL people anymore or simpler. right? I mean, I need Java, Python, I need modern languages. I need a lot more, SQL people. NoSQL people. I need Google Cloud people now that we've never needed before. So these are things where now I can spend the hours they were spending doing manual activities training to be reskilled for a new position that they'll have.
Yeah. I think that workforce piece is so interesting. I've heard a couple of speakers say the phrase, AI won't necessarily replace your job, but a person who understands how to utilize these technologies or have been upskilled in a different way could replace you. And I think that's what you're talking about right here. Chris, I think one of the other elements that's so interesting, and you brought this up when you were talking about kind of the 360-degree view, is potentially not only for the citizen facing or the constituent facing experience. They're coming in, they're getting their fishing permit and their boating license all in the same place, perhaps. How does it also impact the internal silos? Are there ways that by reducing some of the complexity here or the overlap that you could see silos breaking down internally and externally, or is it more on the external side?
No, no, it's definitely both internally and externally. You know, a lot of times when a citizen, whether it's a fishing license or whether it's a social benefit, a lot of
Mhm.
it starts with some questions related to where do they go, what do they do, what are they really trying to get? And so as you can leverage technology to be able to help them self-service some of those areas and help them in many cases walk to where they, direct them to where they need to go to get some of this information so they can be more accurate, more satisfied in a more streamlined experience for those things. So that's, it's hugely impactful. You know, we hear all the times about integrated eligibility or a
Mhm.
no wrong door approach.
Mhm.
And that's really what a lot of these front doors that states are standing up. It's so you don't have to go to one site, one place for these benefits, another site, another place for these, or in many cases, even different physical offices. You know, government's really trying to break down that omni-channel so it's a common experience. Whether you walk in, whether you use a mobile app or whether you use a website for these things, to try to have some continuity of those things. And so that's where, again, technology as a whole and how AI can drive some of this as well to make those things more efficient. And back to the workforce, you
Yeah.
know, so much of this is about helping our teams increase their capacity, and hopefully they're doing more thought leadership work. If we can use AI, if we can use agentic
Mhm.
bots, processes to take some of the low-hanging fruit off their plate so they can spend more time on the mother, the homeless, the people that really need some time spent to find the benefits, services that they need. That's really ultimately what we're trying to do. And yes, it's hard to measure those things, but that's what we want to do is increase the capacity so we're doing more meaningful, impactful work for our organizations and the citizens we serve.
Yeah, and Craig, I want to give you a chance to talk about this workforce component as well, because there are a lot of new skills and new policies and data governance structures in place, let alone the actual technology implementation. How do you tackle this kind of big change?
So I think it takes a village. I think in Mississippi, we are very lucky to have a statewide consortium. It's called the Mississippi Artificial Intelligence Network,
Oh, cool.
and we have partnered with them. So the ability to partner with an entity that's very collaborative and very consortia based has been fabulous. So one of our initial partnerships was we stood up an innovation hub for AI. And in standing that up, premised off the governor's executive order, we partnered with this group, Maine. Um, and so Maine has this community, right? And so we've had multiple meetings with the Maine consortia at Central IT. And so, 40, 50, 60, 70 folks in a room for kind of a two-thirds of a day kind of meeting, 9 to 3, 9 to 2 with a lunch, and really kind of bringing people together to do that, from a credentialing perspective. We've been amazingly blessed here in Mississippi to have an announcement of multiple AWS data centers being built in the center part of our state. And so um, a lot of good partnerships there as well in terms of the kind of credentialing, micro credentialing that might need to happen and sort of roll that out. But I think to your main question, Emily, the partnership with this consortia, I think without that group, we would be much, much less effective. So I'm very grateful for, and this group is universities, community colleges, it is this fabulous mixture. So being able to plug those things together here, the governor does the executive order, plugging in this other group, that has really helped the workforce discussions in a way that we could have never lifted that by ourselves. And it's been fabulous.
Yeah, I hear that sentiment a lot too, from our cybersecurity friends, that the consortiums that they work with, and have created have really been beneficial. So I'm glad to hear that is happening there as well. Matthew, it looks like you answered Mary's question here in the chat, but she was talking about how really you get started here. And that was one of my questions as well. So as folks are listening to this today, maybe they're a small state or local government, maybe they're an independent agency, who knows what they're doing. But if they're listening to this today and they're thinking, there are some potential benefits that could come our way by implementing some AI programs in some way, shape, or form, where do you direct them to start? What are some things that they should be looking at in their laundry list of checklist items that they have to tackle here? What should be on the top of that list?
Well, I'll admit it can be overwhelming. Then pros and cons to blank slate, right? I mean, we're probably 20 years delayed as far as state government, and we're not the only state, but being primarily mainframe, not even having cybersecurity or a chief data officer or analytics or a dashboard tool, we were pretty far behind when I got here, but we are frantically catching up as fast as we can. And the one good thing about a blank slate is there is no bad answer, right? There's as long as you can measure, quantify, define success, you can kind of go any direction that makes sense. Which is also overwhelming because starting somewhere has to exist. So we are building that center of excellence. We're using use case driven AI, but one of the things we're doing, kind of like what Craig was talking about with Maine, I might have to figure out how we formalize it a little more, Craig, but we are using our Omaha office to kick off what will be our first ever data and AI summit using so vendors and agencies in counties partnering together to do presentations on what analytics and AI can do for them. And we have our federal senators, our state senators, our governor, and our congressmen will all be there to see that impact. So we're trying to align Fed and state and get them to see, because we're 100% rate recovery, I can't just go buy things, but I can get their attention to go, hey, when that gets asked for at the legislature for funding, here's what it could actually impact. This is why you should pay attention. Or, hey, federal representation, here's what kind of federal funding we could leverage, and this is the impact it could have in our state economy. So we're trying to draw attention to it because I don't have an unlimited amount of funding. What I know is AI has come so far. I've taught AI, I've taught data analytics. Getting a bunch of statisticians that are crunching error rates in manual R level Python, SPSS, logistic regressions and linear regression equations. That's not going to solve your AI problems. It just isn't. It's too cumbersome. They're always going to be fixated on getting to 98% instead of 88%. And yeah, I have done that. I have had dozens of PhD level statisticians, and it just takes forever. It freezes. But modern AI has so much more ecosystem tools now than we ever had before, makes it a lot more mobile and a lot quicker to implement, experiment, back out of it, go forward with it, pivot, apply the same logic elsewhere to a different use case. So it's a lot easier now to be more mobile.
Yeah. So Chris, I loved Matthew's example. It's a really basic example, but it kind of reminds me of writing an essay in college, right? Like you're staring at a blank page and you're like, I'm never going to write this, so I'm going to go do something else instead. But if you have that outline in front of you, it's like, all right, well, I can do this section, then I can do this section, then I can do this section, but getting to the outline can be really hard. So any advice or best practices that you've seen from your experience in bringing AI forward?
And I love some of the points that Dr. McCarville hit about iteration. So as organizations begin to think about taking on AI, part of this is a cultural change. It's not
Mhm.
just the technology. It truly is changing the mindset
Yeah.
of how everyone thinks about AI and thinks about moving an initiative forward. So really fostering that agile and iterative approach to how we're going to solve problems now and then build on that going forward. Nobody wants to fail at rolling out an initiative, but if we start small with clear objectives and start with a focus, and then think about how do we continue to iterate, that's going to build trust, it's going to build confidence, it's going to build uh, just a culture change so
Mhm.
people know that I can trust this.
Mhm.
Especially as we think about government, we're serving, young to old all
Yep.
across the spectrum, and even our workforce in government is
Yep.
young to old. And so
Yep.
different people different are going to adopt things differently. But if we can build trust with the tools, the resources, the processes we're building out, and know that we're going to iterate, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a silver bullet day one, but we can grow as an organization, a team, and know that we have a vision of how we're going to do this. We got the right guardrails in place to do this. I think that's how organizations will be successful adopting these things.
Great point, Chris. I think that's why we rolled out a guardrail policy. It's only a page and a half. And
Great.
it basically says don't use OpenAI, and think about the bias and the different correlations and the issues that you're going to have when implementing that, but don't use OpenAI for things like HIPAA or PII. Or you'd think that's pretty obvious, but we do have to educate because the vendor community is out there giving away free badged AI things, and it's not all AI either. That's just kind of a coined term now that everybody's labeling everything with.
Great.
And
Yeah.
so, they're saying all this stuff is new AI, but they just relabeled it. I think the best vendor representation I ever saw was at a conference, and they thought they were being funny, but it was on a sign and it was printed, computer print, and then the sign made it look like someone had X'd through the word analytics with red paint and then wrote AI on top of it. And it was like, that is literally what everybody's doing right now. They're just badging everything with AI. So trying to differentiate what is true AI versus analytics and getting to educate, especially the political stakeholders like governors and legislatures at the state that are funding things, to go, it's not a magic pill and it's not going to work magically on day one. It is iterative. It will get better over time, but you have to swallow that it's not going to run 100% day one.
Yeah. All right, we are rapidly running out of time here, but we've got a lot more questions. So we're going to do this next round and rapid fire. And I want one thing from each one of you where things can go off the rails. So if you are implementing things, and I think, Matthew, what you just said a second ago of making sure what you're procuring is actually what you want is a great example. But Craig, where can things go wrong in this process?
I think we've hit on it. What I would say from a guardrails perspective, I love Matthew's example of it being very sweet and short and to the point. I think you need to have built-in fact-checking mechanisms. And I think you can go wrong. And Matthew touched on it more elegantly than I did, but I think that's critical.
You are both incredibly elegant. Chris, where can things go wrong?
Um, Not thinking about the impact of from an ethical and a bias perspective as you look at your AI. Again, to me, this goes back to trust. And if we collectively roll out things that are not taking those ethical and those bias considerations, it could be a very bad taste. And Dr. McCarville said we could end up in the newspapers, and we don't want to do that. And so we need to make sure that we have that in place from an ethics and compliance perspective.
All right. Next round of question for the three of you. And Matthew, I'll start with you on this one. Uh, where are we going next? I feel like the pace of change, even my grandma's talking about AI, and if grandma's talking about AI, then really everyone is. I saw like there was a notice went out in our community. I live in Rockville, Maryland, and it was like sign your toddlers up for a coding class. And I was like, he can't read, but he's going to be a coder. But the pace of change is so fast now. So, what do you see, Matthew, coming up in the next year or so as this evolution continues?
I think we are at the Gartner hype cycle
Yeah.
is not always perfect, but I think it is pretty close right now. Where I don't think we're at that plateau of productivity. I think a lot of people think we're getting there, but I think we're still at that peak of inflated expectations. People are labeling everything with AI. Nobody can truly tell you what it is anymore unless you're in that world, right? And
Yeah.
I feel like half my job is communicating what it is and what it isn't. In that, what is an error rate? Because so Chris and Craig hit it pretty hard, pretty well in that, we need to educate the non-technical stakeholders that are key components in public sector, and there's things that can easily go wrong. So, if you are calculating Medicaid retention or churn and who should be in that system and you don't have a human in the loop and you have a 28% error rate, well, that means you're kicking out 28% of people who should have stayed in the system. What does that mean in public sector? That's millions of people that should not have been kicked off a public benefits system. That's an entitlement system that causes all sorts of lawsuits. So in public sector, we've got a lot of things that we think about that isn't like Verizon thinking about cell phone account churn, right? It's a totally different ballgame in public sector. You're talking about entitlements, public benefit programs, citizen-driven tax dollars that really need to be well spent and well thought out before you implement AI. So thinking about that inflated expectation with AI and making sure, that's why we're doing the use case driven thing and making sure we're checking to see, hey, great idea. We've had a lot of really cool ideas submitted to us, but then we have to call the agency and go, you're never going to be able to do anything with this. It's almost illegal to implement this.
Yeah.
How are you going to even make a decision with this data? Cool question, but you can't really use this. So sorry. Yeah, in moving our dollars forward in something that's much more ethical, logical, implementable.
Yeah. Chris, what do you see?
I see a couple different things. One, AI-driven predictive analytics. And that's some of the points that Dr. McCarville just hit on. How do we have anticipatory government and being able to think about what next? Where do we invest times? And let me give you an example. As we think about enterprise architecture, again, to me, it goes back there. As we think about all the projects, all the initiatives that we have across the enterprise, how do we look at resources? How do we look at capacity? How do we look at some of those contracts that we have? And how does AI help us prioritize where can we have the biggest impact to move an initiative forward or multiple initiatives forward if there's commonalities to that? I think that's one of the things you're seeing with the leveraging of platforms is, like ServiceNow platform could do a lot. How do you look at these 55 different projects and know that this particular area, we can use AI and it's going to help build the model, that we got resources and we got skill sets and we got capacity to move these types of initiatives forward. So I think that's something we're going to continue to see, the evolution of AI helping us accelerate rolling out modern services faster.
Definitely. All right, Craig, you have the hardest job here because you're predicting a future that these two gentlemen haven't predicted. So, what do you got for me?
I think both Chris and Matthew are just spot on. I think, I think that the pace of the change here, Chris, I think touched on it, this agentic. I think we're going to continue to see these tools really outstrip, um, our own capacity to even grapple with them. Right. And I think Matthew talked about this as a state CIO. The vendor ecosystem is huge, right? And being able to do that. Matthew mentioned communication. I think the partner to that is strategy, right? A very thoughtful strategy coupled with communication. I loved Matthew's his summit and bringing together these players, brilliant. What I would say too is absolutely continue to invest in upskilling, and that, in the near term, Emily, I think AI is a tremendous augmentation, but not a replacement for human decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree.
That's a great point.
Love it. All right, you each get to have a final word here. And Craig, I'll let you go first on this one. What do you want attendees to walk away from this discussion thinking about?
I want to double down something on Emily. You said that I've heard. I think AI is an enabler. It's not a job killer, right? And so if you are at the point of your career, I think there is an incredibly important point if you're at a point in your career to really take this seriously. Put it in your bag of tricks, double down on it from a skill set perspective. I don't see you going wrong in doing that.
Definitely. All right, Matthew, what's your closing thought for us?
There's a lot of chaos going on at Fed. There's a lot of unfortunate job loss in DC, but I think the state and the local ecosystem can hopefully pick up some amazing talent that never would have considered working for those entities before. So if we can retain a lot of this Fed level mentality of bringing enterprise Fed level system analysis to the state and the local level, I really think this is an opportunity that's never existed before. If we can turn what is happening right now into a seize the opportunity kind of moment, is leverage that mindset and that talent that the people at Fed in an unfortunate position that they probably never saw coming are in, is for states and locals to pick up that talent and that mindset and bring them into their ecosystem and leverage AI with a different mindset, right? Think about this from a national, a state, and a local level, and really leverage how people think it's at Fed with a level of efficiency and system integration down to a state and local level. I know we could use a lot more of that kind of mindset. So we're hoping to seize the opportunity and offer some great jobs to people that are in an unfortunate position in the DC area right now with what's going on at Fed. So we're keeping a tight eye on that. And I think that's something that a lot of people that never ever would have considered moving out of DC are now considering it. So that's something on our radar, and we're really looking at how do we leverage AI in that ecosystem.
I maintain that you should really work for the Nebraska Tourism Board for sure. But I agree wholeheartedly. All right, Chris, you get to have our final word here.
Yeah, I think both points that Dr. McCarville and Craig made are fantastic. I think the other thing is have a strategy. Have a strategy around this. Think big, but start small and be able to focus, execute, and build success, build that confidence there, and work with business, work with IT, work with business, bring a business problem and work together to solve it. Use technology, not for the sake of technology, but for the sake of really moving your strategic initiatives forward.
All right, those are wise words to end us on, gentlemen. I want to thank you all for sharing your insights with us today. I do have a few notes before everyone goes on to their next meeting or adventure. I don't know what your Wednesday has in store for you, but first things first, there are some great resources for you to download from the resource section. So look at the resources and link side. So make sure you're getting those additional learning opportunities. We'll also be sending you an email with the on-demand version of this session tomorrow. So make sure you're checking your inboxes for that. Maybe send it along to one of your colleagues who might be a little AI cautious. I don't know. But we would really appreciate it. But on behalf of GovLoop and ServiceNow, I hope you enjoyed today's session. I know I learned a lot, so I hope you did as well. And as always, we just appreciate the work that you do every day. It is hard, it is tireless, and you don't get enough praise for the work that you do. So thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at your next training. Bye.
Thank you.